Welcome! Time has no meaning here. Your pain will
Do not leave me unsatisfied. Resist the assault.
If you've been on Reddit or any forum lately, you must have heard about the absolute downturn state of Cold Dot, namely Vortex. The changes to the cast time being no longer instant were met with much disbelief and frustration. What was once considered to be such a classic and well-rounded build that was always there for you on Leaguestart when you didn't know what build you wanted to play is no longer considered viable. People removed it from their recommended Leaguestart lists, and as Vortex fell out of favor, so did the Cold Dot archetype as a whole. But today, we're bringing Cold Dot back into the spotlight through a mostly slept-on skill known as Wintertide brand. This skill has been mostly overshadowed by Vortex for much of its existence. There was initially some hype for Wintertide brand that I saw after the changes to the gem in the patch notes this league, but it subsided as most people concluded that the net changes to DPS were mostly net zero, which is actually not true. It's a little complicated, but we'll explain later in the brand recall section. I think what makes this skill so slept on is that people are not really sure how to build a Wintertide brand character, as well as people not really understanding the mechanics of the skill. Regarding how we build Wintertide brand, in my opinion the most versatile version of the build is a low-life Trickster. If you didn't watch my original video from last league, here's a quick rundown about how this build functions. So we go low-life Trickster, but we don't use Chevron's wrappings because that's a piece of garbage. Instead, we're going to use a rare chest and we use Coruscating Elixir to survive on low life, and we use the Trader Keystone from a Brutal Restraint to sustain our Flask charges. So this build is meant to be like an all-rounder. It's not going to be like the greatest at any type of content, but it's by far it's not going to be the worst. It's going to perform very well in boss encounters, and it can do uber bosses. The map clear, it's alright. In my opinion, it's much better than Vortex, but it's never going to be as fast as, say, Lightning Arrow. Another great quality of the build is that we have a lot of defensive layers, so we're going to die very infrequently. So, whether you are a Vortex refugee, or if you're just looking for an overall solid build, in this video, I'm going to take you through all of the skills mechanics, as well as give you an overview about how I League started Wintertide brand and how I took it through all of the endgame. First things first, we have to understand how the skill mechanics work. This is probably the most important part of the video. Since it ties very heavily with the use of brand recall, I'm going to explain these two hand in hand. Wintertide brand is a cold dot brand that attaches to enemies, and it does a small amount of cold dot damage while it's attached. When the brand duration expires, or if it detaches from a target, it applies a debuff known as Wintertide's End. The debuff is where all of our damage comes from, and this is what gets the 500% more damage at max stages. With the brand mastery, Wintertide brand will automatically bounce between enemies, and thus easily and spreading and maintaining the debuff uptime. While mapping, the use of brand recall is quite liberal. You can use older brands that are lying around, maybe they've cleared a pack or just lying off screen, bring it back to you, and it will maintain the amount of stages that it had previously, and you bring it back into action, instead of casting a new one at 0 stages. You can also use brand recall while shield charging, since the cast time is instant. In a single target scenario, without multiple things to be attached to, things are a little bit different. So let's illustrate a hypothetical scenario here on the graph. On the y-axis we have DPS, and on the x-axis we have time. The way to think about this as time is as, time flows through a fight, and DPS is, the thicker the y-axis is, the more DPS we're doing. Let's say we're pulling up to a boss, right? It's only one boss, nothing to reattach to. And we're going to represent a Wintertide brand as one of these, small bars. So it's only this thick because, Wintertide brand, the base Wintertide brand doesn't really do a lot of damage. But we can cast up to 3 at a time, so we're going to represent it like this. When they're going to build up stages, and when they expire, 3 debuffs will be applied. The rule is that you can apply as many debuffs as you want at a time. However, only the strongest debuff will do damage. Now, the fight continues, right? After this happens, our next 3 Wintertide brands will attach. Once they expire, another debuff will be applied to the boss. And this continues. Now, you can start to see the problem here is that we have all these large gaps in our DPS. This is where brand recall comes in. Let's say, again, we start the fight, we cast our 3 brands, we cast Elemental Weakness, we cast Cold Snap, but somewhere in the middle, we cast brand recall. What's going to happen is that now we get a debuff here. It's not going to be as strong as, like a 20-stage debuff, but it's something. And we're still going to get the 20 stage debuff because right after we recall the brands, they're just going to reattach if you're standing on the boss. And let's say we do another one here. We do another one here. This is what I mean when I say brand recall doubles your DPS in a single target scenario. Because over time, it's going to fill all these gaps. And what it's also going to do is that, when you recall, because you can have 5 brands out at a time, they're gonna get mixed up. You're gonna recall them all, but the ones that reattach, some of them are going to be the ones that have already built up like 12 stages, and sometimes you're gonna reattach ones that have 0 stages. So it's gonna average out over time, and you're gonna get a good mix of max stages. This is also what I mean when I read the patch notes, and I concluded that the changes to Wintertide brand were also a massive buff to the DPS. This is what I mean. So previously, with the helmet enchant, we would go to 24 stages. So, before 24 stages, it was 20% more damage per stage. We would get to 480% more damage, right? Great. Now we can only go to 20 stages, but it's 25% more damage per stage, and we get to 500% more damage per stage. So 20% increase here, not a big deal. Everyone concluded, sure. Here's the kicker. Let's say we recall a brand, let's say we recall the brand at 10 stages. So previously, at 20% more damage per stage, this brand that was recalled, the debuff will do 200% more damage. But now, with the same gear, the same cast speed, same everything, this debuff now does 250% more damage. Can you see this? This is what I mean when I say it's a massive buff, because number 1, we do more damage overall. Number 2, we do this damage faster. Now that we kind of know how the skill works, it's time to see it in action. In my view, I kind of split this build into 3 phases. Leaguestart, which is Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter. A transition phase in which you phase in all the unique items. And the 3rd phase, which is Endgame. When you Leaguestart Wintertide brand, and you start from scratch, you have nothing, you always first play as Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter. This is the same as what Cold Dot players did in the past. Cold Dot Tricksters who played Vortex, so you probably no stranger. Our damage here is decent. You might feel the damage kind of fall off later in red maps, but it's definitely strong enough to continue progressing your Atlas. In your background, you're watching the build perform in its first 2 Watchstone fights in Affliction League. Full disclaimer, my gear here is some hot garbage. Probably most of it I picked up in like Act 6, and I just kept using it because I had my colors. The only things I have invested here is that I do have a 6th link that I bought so that my escape artist would actually do something. And I also bought a Ram Gaze just for some cheap damage. But, it's day 1, right? You just want to cap your resistances, and you just want to be pushing your Atlas progress. Ultimately, in my opinion, the Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter setup, this phase, the build is definitely strong enough to do all the non-Uber content eventually if you kind of want to stay in this phase and maintain this build style. However, I recommend that you want to switch to Low-Life as soon as possible. You can take your time and progress as long as you want, but the faster you swap to Low-Life, the faster you can have all your other defenses online, the faster that you're going to be able to do some of the endgame content. While progressing your Atlas, it's important that you start to collect some of the items that you're going to need to transition into Low-Life. In terms of transitioning, at a bare minimum, you're going to need 3 items. A Prism Guardian, a Coruscating Elixir, and a Brutal Restraint with a dedication to Balbala. I will recommend you transition once you can answer yes to the next 3 questions. Number 1, do you have enough energy shield? With all of our defensive auras, the build is quite tanky regardless of what your raw energy shield total is, because we run Grace, we have Determination, and we do have a Defiance banner. So I'd say even around 3000 energy shield, you're going to be feeling pretty tanky. The easiest way to get some ES is to have a decently rolled body armor with high evasion and ES. This is why I recommend you buy like a 6-link evasion ES base early on, because you can use it while you're still playing Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter, and when you transition, you could just hit it with a few dense fossils, and you can carry it on for a while. The next question you need to ask is, can I reserve all of my auras? There are 2 pools that we are reserving. Number 1, we're reserving our mana, and number 2, we are reserving our life because we're low life. To reserve all our mana, just through the passive skill tree, we have enough mana reservation efficiency to reserve everything we need. For our life, we need a little bit more. So even after taking the 20% increased life reservation efficiency mastery from auras, we still need 1% increased reservation efficiency somewhere else. The two ways to get this is, number one, you can just buy Dragonfang's Flight, or number two, you can buy a 2% implicit corrupted jewel that has increased reservation efficiency of skills. The last question you need to ask is, do I have 100% Flask uptime? Since we're using Coruscant Elixir, we rely on having 100% uptime on this Flask or else we'll die to 1 chaos damage. Assuming you picked up the Flask mastery nodes already on the passive skill tree, I recommend you pick up a belt with at least 30% increased Flask effect duration. With this, your Mana Flask and your Coruscant Elixir should have 100% uptime. For the Quicksilver, at 20% quality, you need at least 48% increased charge recovery as a prefix to get 100% uptime. Obviously, quality beyond 20% helps. Your Flask must also be enchanted with reuse at the end of the Flask effect so that you maximize the uptime. You can pick up the remaining uniques that I've recommended in the POB as you continue to progress. I definitely recommend use your rare gear slots to sort out your resistances, your attributes, and your spell suppression. Chaos resistance is kind of a luxury. You don't really need it in the mid game. It's something that you can look into once you have everything else sorted out. Once you've acquired most of the unique gear and a couple of good rare pieces, welcome to the endgame. This is where the build shines. You're quite tanky while still having the damage to do all of the content in the endgame. At this point, it's important to make sure that your Eldritch implicits are in good order. You can swap one step ahead to Swift Killer to get Frenzy charges once you have Frenzy generation on your body armor. Scorch and Exposure are also very important to have. The largest increases your damage. The biggest upgrades you can make are probably a better weapon, a Watcher's Eye, and getting Awakened gems. Once you're here, there's not much else to say. In the description, I've attached 3 different POBs. One is for Leaguestart, where your Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter. Another one is mid and endgame setup, where you're just transitioning into the low-life setup. And another one is my final min-max version. And that marks the end of the main video. If you made it this far, I thank you very much for watching and your time. If you have any questions or you need some help troubleshooting your build, definitely feel free to leave a comment down below in the comments and link your POB as well. The rest of the video is just a miscellaneous collection of, just random tips and tricks that I've collected over the many leagues that I've played Wintertide brand that may potentially increase your experience of this build. So give it a watch if you have any time, but otherwise, thanks for watching. Catch you later. All right, so this part's gonna be pretty chill. I just want to share, just some quality of life, some other useful tips, and also just address a lot of things that I saw in my last video in the comment section, just like questions regarding the build. I think a lot of these tips will be able to help your experience be much cleaner, much smoother, and we're just going to go through these in order. So the first thing on our list is how to craft the endgame weapon. So the weapon that I have, it's going to be fully deterministic craft. I'm going to show you how right now. So the first thing to do is you're going to get a base that has you're going to grab a base that has fractured tier 1 cold damage. For the implicit, you want to make sure that it's either spell damage, elemental damage, or cast speed is even fine. You can also do fractured spell damage, but I find that cold damage it's going to be much cheaper. Yeah, so something like this is probably fine. You just you use a Blessed Orb because to get this is at 37%. So once you buy the base, let's just head over to Craft of Exile. So this works with both scepters and wands, but just for example's sake, I'm going to use a wand. So again, you want to look for the highest implicit. Cast speed, spell damage, both are fine depending on your build. And let's just get into it. So let's see. Want to fracture cold damage, tier 1 cold damage, great. So the first step is that you're just gonna alteration, augment spam until you hit tier 1 damage over time multiplier. To save time, I'm just gonna add it on, but this is pretty easy to get. The weighting is not, it's pretty high. So it's about 1 in 300, 400 alterations. Once you get to this step, we're going to use a Regal Orb, and then we need to annul off the extra mods so that we only have damage over time multiplier. If you miss, you have to go back to step 1, but again, it's not hard to get damage over time multiplier back from alt spamming. Once you get here, what we're going to do is that you're going to go to your crafting bench. We're going to craft, can have up to 3 crafted modifiers. You're going to craft cannot roll attack modifiers, and then you're going to craft cold damage added to spells. Once you're here, you're going to go to your harvest tool, add remove cold. You are guaranteed to slam here +1 all cold skill gems. As you can see, no matter how many times you do this, you're guaranteed to hit +1 cold. So there's a 25% chance that you remove your cold damage, your damage over time multiplier. If this happens, I'm sorry, but you have to start over at step 1. But otherwise, you're guaranteed to hit +1 cold. So once you're here, you're going to go to crafting bench and you're going to remove your crafted modifiers. So I'm just going to remove it manually because I don't know how to do it here. So you're going to remove all your crafted modifiers from your crafting bench. And then you're just going to craft 3 crafted modifiers, cold damage over time multiplier, and damage over time, which is here. Right. And this is your endgame 1, you know, like this is very solid. This is up to 40%. You know, like this is about like what, 170% increased damage, +1 to all cold skill gems, and 45% damage over time multiplier. You know, this is pretty hard to beat. Obviously spend like a massive amount of currency. In this section, we're going to go over some of the Affliction League specific bonuses that we kind of allocated into. Just to be clear, this build can perfectly function well without any extra stats, but you know, it's Affliction League and these things are free, so I'm going to use them. I think there's a lot of good options. There's not really any downsides, so I'm just going to show you what I used. I think one of the things that's kind of mandatory is that you either get a mana reservation efficiency one, or if you're just like me, you can get one that has banner skills have no reservation because it was cheaper. With this, you actually get to save a passive skill point here. If you're running Dragonfang's Flight, you actually get to skip both of these nodes, which is very nice. The next one I would recommend is definitely a Cooling Strike one. This is just like a raw 10% damage increase. You know, just flame dash through the boss or something. And for the last one, you know, there's a lot of great options. You can get Curse Effect if you're doing like a lot of bossing. You can get like Explode if you're doing a lot of mapping. Another one that I found great success with is you can get Movement Speed cannot be modified below base value, because we do spec out of 1 step ahead. So you know, having this can be great if you're running content that constantly slows you or something. I didn't find a lot of useful suffixes. So the best one we can get is just mana as extra ES for all of them. It gives us a lot of ES. And it's just free. Also, this backpack right here, absolutely goated. It's unplayable without this thing right here. All right, onto the topic about swapping auras for more situational power. So, in the end game, especially in Uber boss fights, not a lot of skills are coded as attacks. So, having Grace in like an Uber boss fight actually doesn't do a lot of good. So, what I recommend is that for all the Uber boss fights, except maybe Uber Cortex, depending on the mods, I say you remove your Grace, and you add Zealotry. This Zealotry does 16% more spell damage before aura effect. You will need a white socket on your Prism Guardian, but you know, even with reserving Zealotry, you know, we still have like over 10k evasion rating, and like, you know, 60% chance to avoid. This is still fine, but this is going to push your DPS to a level earlier than you might have it. For example, you might be able to do Uber bosses a little bit earlier than you would otherwise without this extra aura. If you're doing content that needs you to run fast, for example, if you're doing Sanctum, if you're running through Lab, I recommend swapping your Grace for a Haste. Luckily, this is the same color, so you don't need a white socket, but you know, this is a lot of extra utility as well. And you know, for Sanctum, you're probably not getting hit. Well, you shouldn't be getting hit at all. And in Sanctum, any of like the defenses, they scale off your base armor, evasion, and ES, not any that is increased from any auras. But, you know, just for mapping in general, because things hit you a lot, you know, in general, unless you're doing any specialized content, I recommend still sticking with Grace because it is all around just great. And also Ghost Recovery with 40,000 ES, so 40,000 evasion rating is quite significant. All right, so instant Frenzy Charge generation. So you might have noticed that the way we sustain our frenzy charges is that we have a chest that gives a frenzy charge every 14, 15, 13 seconds, depending on what tier you have it. Now, with 5 frenzy charges, normally you have to wait like a minute for all your frenzy charges to go to max every time you go to a new area, you know, which can kind of suck because if you're doing a boss, I don't want to wait like a minute every time I start it, right? Something you can do, for example, let's say I'm loading into a new area, right? I have no charges at all. I can weapon swap, reserve all my auras, and we start with 2 frenzy charges. What happened? So I'm a weapon swap. What you can do is that you can buy a shield that has +2 minimum frenzy charges. This means you only need to wait for 3 more frenzy charges, and you can just jumpstart them in a fight. If you're feeling extremely spicy, you can use an Awakener Orb to add +2 endurance charges to your build. And these endurance charges, they last like half a minute, right? They last 30 seconds. So, you know, like halfway through a boss fight, you can just, you know, you can just do a quick weapon swap, reserve your auras, and you can just hold on to 2 endurance charges for the rest of the fight. It's pretty useful. Speaking of reserving auras, this leads well into the next section, which is button and skill management. So we have a lot of skills, you know, not just auras, but just like skills in general. And when you do die, it can kind of suck to have to reuse all of your auras. So I do not recommend clicking on one button to reserve all your auras. That kind of sucks. What I do recommend is that you first, on your weapon swap, you reserve all 3 auras, 3 to 5 auras that are not any of the life reservation. So reserve 3 of the auras, and then on your main buttons, using your control additional auras, that you reserve the other 4, right? So let's say you do die, right? You know, you have to get all your things off, right? You can just load back in, weapon swap, and turn on all your auras. I've also bound Frost Shield to A on my control key, you know, because we've kind of run out of buttons on the main interface. All right, how do we check our Flask uptime? So the benchmark I gave earlier in the video was 30% increased, at least 30% increased Flask effect duration on your belt, and then 48% charge recovery right on your Quicksilver. You can see under the Flask uptime that it's 100% right here. If you want to know how much you need at a minimum, you can craft another item. So let's pick up a Flask here. Utility Flask utility. Let's do where's Quicksilver? Great. So you can see right here on the Flask uptime how much you need. So let's go to charge recovery, and you can see as we go up, the minimum we need is 47% increased charge recovery. This is because we have 31% Flask effect duration. So, you know, and you know, let's say that you have 20, our quality is a little bit higher, right? 26%. How much do we need now? We only need about 38, I think. No, we need 39, right? I think I saw it right there. So we need 39% increased charge recovery as a prefix. So you can use this tool right here to estimate how much increased charge recovery you need on your Flask given the rest of your gear in POB. Just a note, I always use the Quicksilver as my benchmark because if my Quicksilver has 100% uptime, I guarantee you that the Coruscating Elixir and the Mono Flask also have 100% uptime. Like they will just they overflow. These gain much more charges and use much less charges than the Quicksilver. How do we find the best timeless drill? Now, in my opinion, the best timeless drill you can get is the effect of non-cursed aura from skills on both of these nodes right here. On Leaguestart, don't worry about this. You know, just buy the Brutal Restraint Balbala. You know, you're buying your first timeless drill. Just buy the cheapest one that's dedicated to Balbala. It doesn't really matter. But you know, later on, if you're trying to min max, you know, some of these nodes do matter, right? So to find the best one, you can go to find timeless drill, and so you need Brutal Restraint. Make sure it's Balbala. The jewel socket is its minion instability up there. You want to filter nodes because this will only show the ones that you have allocated. And don't worry about the rest. So for mine, I'm running the increased aura effect one, and I want 2 of them to. I want 2 instances of it, so it's going to be 1, 0, 2. And if I search that, you can see that there's only 3 timeless jewels that have 2 nodes that both have 8% increased non-effective aura skills. And I believe the one I have is 5578. If we go back into Path of Exile, go to the passive skill tree, you can see that it is indeed 5575, right? Which is 8% increased effective non-course auras, and the same are over here. If I go back to POB, let's say that instead I want Onslaught, right? Onslaught is another great node because it's 100% and it lasts for 8 seconds. Onslaught, right? Please. All right. We want one of those, and let's search for it. All right. So if you want Onslaught, there's only one that has that's at this location that's going to have 8% aura skill and Onslaught here. What you can do to check this is you can double click, add it to your build, and you can just drag it into the where it is, and you'll see that it is indeed 8% increased effective non-aura skills from 8% increased effective non-course auras from your skills, and Onslaught on kill for 8 seconds. This one's pretty good. It's guaranteed Onslaught and it lasts 8 seconds instead of 4. Now, a lot of people ask me, can I play Wintertide brand as Elementalist? Can I play Elementalist? Can I play Occultist? Can I play Scion? The short answer is yes. Long answer is no. So I think early on, I actually do think the Elementalist Occultist actually does better than Trickster, because right, if we look at some of these nodes, right, like this comes on right away, just 25% exposure, just 30% more damage, like just free shock, just 20% cold pen, just 15% more cold damage, extra curse, it's just great, right? But I think the main problem is that in the end game, these two ascendancies fall off, especially for Wintertide brand, because the two things that Trickster provides that the other builds don't have is, number one, easier access to spell suppression just because we're closer to the right side of the tree, and also frenzy charges. So a great luxury that Trickster has is that just from the passive skill tree, we have enough cast speed to get to 20 activations per brand, right? Just from these free frenzy charges. You're not going to get those easily on these two builds, right? And the 200% increased charge duration is actually what allows us to use the chest implicit. So the answer is yes and no. If you're not planning to do Ubers, just planning to Leaguestart and maybe transitioning to something else, yeah, go ahead and do Occultist, do Elementalist. You'll feel stronger early on. But for Trickster, if you want to be taking on the end game, you need the things that Trickster offers, in my opinion. And finally, the question I get probably way too often is, Owen, how much damage do you actually do? Your POB says that you do 800,000 DPS. Is that accurate? Well, obviously no, because this build does have enough damage to do all Uber bosses. I'll tell you that much. If you watched the earlier section where we went over brand recall, you will know that the game is not going to be able to calculate how much damage you have over time. It's just the POB just doesn't have that functionality. But I'll tell you that the damage is good enough. Honestly, the way that I compare league to league is that I kind of just, with the same configuration, I look at how much damage I have this league. If I go to if I look to a earlier build from last league, I look at, okay, what is it bigger than the number here? And if the answer is yes, then we do more damage, right? So that's sometimes how I compare it. Another thing you can do is that you can go to po.ninja, you can go to the builds, you can find Wintertide brand. You can filter out trash classes. So yeah, then you can sort by DPS, right? And obviously, people don't have 100,000 damage on the Wintertide brand. This is not correct, right? I don't have a 406 damage, but on a relative basis, you can see that, well, obviously, I do have the most damage, right? And I have, on a relative basis, I do 2 times the damage of this guy. So bigger number is bigger than smaller number. So if you were this guy who has a very good build, who has a very solid build all around, if you were him, you might click on someone else above you, see, okay, what changes does he have to his build? What gear that he has, what is he using that I'm not using, and you can just kind of try to compare that way on a relative basis. And that's it.